As far as I'm concerned, the more takes on the classic XCOM formula of battling alien invasions on both a tactical and global scale, the merrier. Phoenix Point has the distinction of being designed by the original creator of that formula, Julian Gollop, and it has some clever ideas that seem to respond to the acclaimed Firaxis-developed XCOM games that streamlined his original concept by reviving some of its famous complexity. Many of those ideas aren't all that refined though, and some wild balance swings and general bugginess make turning the tide against alien invaders a little bit more of an uphill battle than usual. In this scenario, the unwelcome guests humanity is fighting are human-fish hybrids melded together by an alien virus, which explains why the enemies look like the revenge of the Red Lobster buffet. Some do have some genuinely weird and cool animations though.
That actually works?
While the basic look and feel are very similar to Firaxis' XCOM, it takes a significantly different approach to nearly every mechanic. There are way too many differences to list, but the trend is toward more complexity. Moving, aiming, and inventory management all have more options and granularity, and some of that produces more memorable moments than it does busywork. Of course, more complex doesn't always mean deeper gameplay. When you're aiming, you see this circle. That's where your shot might land, and how big it is based on your weapon and soldier stats. That's an interesting approach that's a little bit more organic than XCOM's raw number and dice rolls, and hitting weak points to disable enemies you can't kill quickly feels tactical. For example, headshots usually affect a target's willpower instead of just dealing more damage. That's a cool system because willpower is the mana that enables special skills, and the way it's tied to morale makes using a lot of it an interesting trade-off. On top of that, every shot is modeled realistically, which is a cool touch except when things literally get in the way. Sometimes the UI will lie to you about when you'll have a clear shot because your heavy weapon was too low and was blocked by your own cover. So it's a double-edged sword. Phoenix Point's 7 soldier classes and their abilities are reasonably diverse, and you have some degree of control over who you recruit based on which of the 3 faction spaces you go shopping at. New Jericho troops are heavily armored, the Sanhedrin are stealthy and futuristic, and the Disciples of Anu are weirdo cultists who are big on melee weapons. Where it gets interesting is when a soldier hits level 4 and can unlock skills from a different class, which opens up some questionably balanced possibilities. In any case, it sure feels good to drag and drop gear and ammunition onto soldiers' loadout screens again. I've missed that level of control. Like most XCOM-style games, Phoenix Point's tactical maps are procedurally assembled from pools of parts, which has the benefit of keeping them from becoming too predictable, but also tends to keep them from being especially memorable. And some of them are not well optimized at all, even on a GTX 2080. The most common resource scavenging missions get old pretty quickly, but there are a fair number of other types that pop up from time to time. Those include rescuing civilians, destroying enemy nests, and of course base defense. There are also story missions occasionally, but some are a little obnoxious because objectives are hard to find and sometimes they'll send you all the way across an empty map. The warmed over Geoscape map is one area that actually doesn't add a lot of complexity. Base management is depressingly simple, and all you're really doing is moving your dropships from map node to map node and scanning. Sometimes you'll get random story events with moral questions that affect your relationships with the 3 factions, and those are one of Phoenix Point's best strategy level ideas. Relationships are crucially important because those factions double as a major part of the tech tree. Most of the gear you get comes from your allies. You can also choose to raid human faction outposts to steal resources, technology, or even dropships through special missions. In a lot of ways, it's the kind of meaningful faction interaction I wanted but didn't get out of XCOM 2's War of the Chosen expansion. On the other hand, the way the tech tree works is confusing and not nearly as satisfying, in that you rarely get new guns that are flat out better than what you had at the beginning. All that leads to the real problem, the one that forced me to give up on actually finishing a campaign for this review after more than 40 hours of attempts. At a certain point, the difficulty goes absolutely crazy. 2 separate campaign attempts were thwarted by mandatory story missions that put me up against 3 heavily armored artillery units that shelled me into oblivion from across the map. On top of that, I was being harassed by several really evil and durable psychic units who can mind control not 1, but 2 soldiers in a single turn. I'm not saying these are impossible to beat with the right squad composition and a fair amount of luck, but they sure stopped me dead in my tracks and had me wondering how the hell I was supposed to survive this. That nasty difficulty spike is just one of many areas of Phoenix Point that needs more than a little fine-tuning. I could list dozens of issues that reflect a general lack of polish, like not being able to customize controls or the fact that there's no memorial for dead soldiers.
No time to waste.
Phoenix Point has a lot of interesting ideas to contribute to the revitalized turn-based tactics genre, but many of them are in need of refining and balancing. Things like managing faction relationships and disabling individual enemy body parts are great, and it strikes a good balance of complexity with inventory management. At the same time, it's woefully underdeveloped in certain areas like mission variety and base building, and a late-game difficulty spike is so severe and unfair feeling that it crushed the spirit of this XCOM veteran, twice. Combine that with a general lack of polish, and it leaves Phoenix Point in a state that still feels very experimental and unrefined, but it's an interesting experiment to be sure. For more strategy and tactics, check out our reviews of Planet Zoo, John Wick Hex, and Age of Wonders Planetfall. And for everything else, stick with IGN.